My mother's affection was reserved solely for my sister, the golden child. When I reconnected with my family years later, my sister pressured me to be her surrogate, and my parents fully supported her request without even consulting me. I always knew my place in the family. I was the other daughter, the one who wasn't quite good enough. My sister, Hannah, was the golden child, bright, talented, and always the center of attention. If Hannah got an A, there'd be a celebration. If I managed the same, it was barely acknowledged. That was the story of my childhood. Hannah's achievements were met with praise, while mine were shrugged off as flukes or simply ignored. I remember one particularly painful moment from when I was 8. I had just received a perfect score on a math test, a subject I struggled with. I ran home, eager to show my mom. She glanced at the paper, muttered a half-hearted good job, and then turned back to help Hannah with her science fair project. I stood there, paper in hand, feeling invisible. The indifference wasn't limited to school achievements. It was woven into every part of my life. I was born with a congenital heart defect, a condition that required careful monitoring. Instead of receiving compassion, I was met with resentment. My mother would say during heated arguments, "Do you know how much we've sacrificed because of you?" The words stung every time. Hannah never had to hear that. For her, there was always encouragement, always praise, always support. She was their miracle, the perfect daughter they could proudly show off to the world. But it wasn't just about my condition. It was my entire existence that seemed like an inconvenience to them. I was quieter, more reserved, and I didn't fit their idea of success. My father once told me during one of his rare moments of honesty, "Hannah's got the drive. You're just different." It was a sentiment I heard often, spoken or implied. My saving grace was my grandparents. They were my refuge, the only ones who didn't make me feel like a burden. Grandma would take me for long walks, telling me stories about people who had overcome struggles far worse than mine. "You're stronger than you think, Emma," she'd say, her eyes full of warmth. I clung to her words like a lifeline, using them as armor against the reality of my own home. As I grew older, I started to realize that the only way to survive was to detach. I threw myself into schoolwork, not to earn my parents' approval, but to build a future that didn't depend on it. I earned scholarships, joined clubs, and kept pushing forward, all while keeping my heart condition in check. By the time I graduated high school, I had already planned my escape, college, far away from home. I moved out the moment I could, leaving behind a family that had never truly been mine. In college, I met Luke. He was everything I needed, kind, funny, and most importantly, someone who saw me for who I was. We met in a literature class, and it wasn't long before we were spending all our free time together. He accepted my health issues without hesitation, never making me feel like a burden. For the first time in my life, I experienced what unconditional love felt like. We fell in love quickly, and it wasn't long before we were married. Luke was my safe haven, and our life together was filled with genuine happiness. We had a son, Jack, who became the light of our lives. I focused on being the kind of mother I'd always wanted, one who was present, loving, and understanding. My family remained in the background, reduced to occasional holiday cards and texts that never led to deeper conversations. I no longer sought their approval. I had found my own happiness and built a family where I felt truly loved. But just when I thought I had finally escaped the shadows of my past, a call came that would change everything. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and Luke, Jack, and I were having pancakes in the kitchen. My phone rang, and I glanced at the screen to see Hannah's name. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Emma," she greeted me, her voice unusually chipper. "Hi, Hannah," I replied, unsure of what this sudden call could mean. We hadn't spoken in over a year. After some awkward small talk, she finally got to the point. "Listen, I know we haven't been close, but I really need your help," she said, her tone turning serious. I tensed up. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. She paused, then dropped the bombshell. "I need a surrogate, Emma. I was hoping you'd consider it." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I felt a rush of emotions, shock, anger, confusion, all at once. "Are you serious?" I managed to ask. "You know my heart condition makes pregnancy risky, but it's manageable," Hannah argued, her tone matter-of-fact. "The doctors said it's possible, with the right precautions." "Your family, Emma. You owe this to me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After years of being overlooked and neglected, Hannah was now asking me to put my health at risk, for her. It was as if all the years of hurt had culminated in this one audacious request. I need time to think, I said, my voice barely holding steady. Don't take too long, she replied curtly. This is important. As I hung up, I felt a wave of anger and disbelief wash over me. I told Luke about the call, and he was furious. How could she even ask that of you? He demanded. It's not just selfish. It's dangerous. But I knew that the worst was yet to come. My parents, who had never been there for me, were about to make their presence known in the most unexpected and painful way. It was a typical Saturday morning. Luke was flipping pancakes, and Jack was tugging at my leg, begging for chocolate chips in a stack. It was one of those moments that felt full of love, the kind that made me grateful for the family I had built, a sharp contrast to the one I'd left behind. Then my phone rang. The caller ID read Hannah, and I froze. We hadn't spoken in over a year, and I hadn't expected to hear from her anytime soon, let alone on a peaceful morning like this. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer. Who is it? Luke asked, noticing my expression. It's Hannah, I said, my voice low. He raised an eyebrow. Are you going to pick up? I took a deep breath and nodded. I guess I should. Hey, Emma, Hannah greeted, her voice surprisingly cheerful. How are you? I'm good, I replied cautiously. How about you? Fine, she said, though her tone lacked sincerity. We fumbled through some awkward small talk, but I could tell she had something on her mind. Finally, she cut to the chase. Listen, I have something important to ask you, she said, her voice suddenly serious. I know we haven't been close, but I really need your help. I braced myself, unsure of what was coming next. What is it? I need a surrogate, she said bluntly. And I was hoping you'd consider doing it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. This wasn't a simple favor. She was asking me to put my life at risk. Hannah, you know I have a heart condition, I said, my voice wavering. Pregnancy isn't safe for me. Your condition is manageable, she replied, her tone cold and clinical. The doctors said it's possible with the right precautions. I couldn't believe her audacity. Why me? I asked, still reeling from the shock. Why not someone else? Because you're family, she said, as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. You owe this to me, Emma. I felt a familiar sting, the same one I'd experienced throughout my childhood, being made to feel guilty, like my existence was a debt I owed to others. Oh, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't owe you anything, Hannah. She didn't back down. This is important, Emma. I know we have our differences, but you can make this right. Her words dripped with manipulation, but I wasn't the same desperate girl who once craved her family's approval. I knew I had to protect myself, but part of me still struggled with the guilt she was laying on thick. I need time to think, I managed to say, my voice shaking. Fine, but don't take too long, she said, her tone impatient. This is urgent. I hung up and sat down at the kitchen table, feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and hurt. Luke noticed immediately. What happened? He asked, setting down the spatula. I told him everything, from Hannah's audacious request to her expectation that I would agree simply because I was family. She actually said that. Luke's face was a mix of disbelief and fury. How dare she? You have a serious medical condition, Emma. This isn't just selfish, it's reckless. I know, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. But the way she said it, like I owed it to her, it brought back everything I thought I'd left behind. Luke came over and wrapped me in a hug. You don't owe her anything, he said firmly. You've worked too hard to build this life. We're not going back. But it seemed like my past wasn't ready to let me go just yet. The pressure mounts. Over the next few days, I received a barrage of messages from Hannah. At first, they were vaguely apologetic, attempting to guilt me into compliance. I know it's a lot to ask, but think of how this could bring us closer, one message read. Another was more direct, Emma. Don't be selfish. You're the only one who can help. Then my parents got involved. One evening, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I knew it wouldn't end there. Hi, Mom, I said cautiously. Emma, we heard about Hannah's situation, she said, cutting straight to the point. This is your chance to be part of the family again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Part of the families? I echoed, feeling my anger rise. By putting my life at risk? You're exaggerating, she replied dismissively. You know your condition is stable. You've always been the strong one, Emma. It's time you did something meaningful for your sister. Her words brought back years of suppressed pain. I've always been the one sacrificing, I shot back, my voice trembling. And you've always been the ones demanding more. Don't make this about the past, she snapped. Hannah needs you, and you need to put aside your selfishness for once. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm not doing it, I said firmly. This isn't something I'm willing to risk, no matter how much you try to guilt me. My mother's voice turned icy. You'll regret this, Emma. Family is all you have. I hung up, my heart pounding. I knew this was only the beginning of what would be a long, painful battle. I'd been here before, manipulated, guilt, made to feel small. But this time, I had something I didn't have back then. Luke, Jack, and the strength I'd found in building my own life. But as the days went by, the pressure only grew stronger. Hannah and my parents became relentless, determined to break me down. I realized that I wasn't just fighting a single request. I was fighting years of ingrained expectations and a lifetime of being told that my needs came second. It was time to stand up for myself, once and for all. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling from the previous day. I busied myself with Jack's breakfast, pretending everything was normal. But the truth was, I knew this was only the beginning. My phone rang just as I was clearing the table, and I felt a familiar sense of dread when I saw his mom flashing on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up, knowing there was no avoiding this. Hi, Mom, I greeted, trying to keep my tone neutral. Emma, she started, her voice sharp and businesslike. We heard from Hannah. You need to seriously consider this. I felt the irritation bubbling up. It's not that simple, Mom, I said, already tired of this conversation. You know I have a heart condition. It's risky for me. You're being dramatic, she snapped, her voice full of impatience. Hannah needs you. You've always been strong enough to manage your health, so now it's time to do something for her. The way she dismissed my concerns so casually was infuriating. You're asking me to risk my life, I countered, trying to stay calm. This isn't about being dramatic, it's about being realistic. My father's voice broke in, sounding uncharacteristically gentle, like he was trying to play the good cop. Emma, we understand that this is difficult, he said. But this could bring us closer as a family. We've had our differences, but this is a chance for you to make things right. Make things right? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean by putting my health on the line? By doing something dangerous just because Hannah wants it? My mother's tone turned colder. You're overreacting, she insisted. You've always been selfish, Emma. It's time you think about someone other than yourself. I felt like I was being dragged back to a place I'd worked so hard to leave behind, a place where my needs were always secondary, and my worth was measured by what I could sacrifice. I could feel my chest tightening, not just from the stress, but from the familiar sense of suffocation that came with every interaction with my family. I've done enough for this family, I said, my voice cracking under the weight of old wounds. I won't do this. There was a long silence on the other end, then my mother's voice, now dripping with disappointment. You'll regret this, Emma. Hannah is your sister, and you're turning your back on her. I hung up, feeling the familiar mix of guilt and anger wash over me. I knew what they were doing, playing on my sense of obligation, trying to make me feel like I was the problem. But this time, it wasn't going to work. I wasn't the same person who used to bend over backward for their approval. As soon as I ended the call, Luke pulled me into a tight hug. He had been listening from the kitchen doorway. I'm proud of you, he said, for standing up to them. I leaned into his embrace, grateful for his unwavering support. I just don't know how far they're willing to go, I admitted. They've already gone too far, he replied firmly. We're not going to let them push you around, Emma. Not this time. Seeking protection. The next morning, Luke and I sat down to discuss our next steps. We need legal protection, Luke insisted. They're clearly not going to back off. I nodded, knowing he was right. I don't even know where to start, I admitted, feeling a bit overwhelmed. We'll find a good lawyer, Luke reassured me. Someone who can help you stand your ground legally. They need to know that this isn't just about guilt-tripping you into something dangerous. Later that day, we made an appointment with a family law attorney, a woman named Laura, who came highly recommended. As soon as we explained the situation, she didn't mince words. What they're asking is not only morally wrong but could also be legally questionable if they try to coerce you. Her words were both validating and sobering. They keep saying I owe this to the family, I told her, feeling the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. You don't owe anyone your health or your body, Laura said firmly. And if they try to pursue this legally, we'll be ready. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a small sense of relief. I had been conditioned for so long to believe that my worth was tied to what I could do for others, especially my family. But now I had an ally who wasn't part of their manipulative web, someone who was there to protect me, not their expectations. The battle escalates. The following week, my parents upped the ante. They showed up unannounced at our doorstep one afternoon. I wasn't surprised. It was classic behavior. Luke was home, too, and he opened the door before I could stop him. "Emma," my mother started, her voice full of urgency. "We need to talk." I felt a surge of anger and dread. "You can't just show up like this," I said, trying to keep my composure. "I've already told you my answer." My father, trying to appear calm, spoke next. "Emma, we're not here to fight. We just want you to reconsider." Luke stepped in, his voice firm. "She's already made her decision. You need to respect that." "You don't understand, Luke," my mother insisted, her eyes flashing with frustration. "This is about family. Something you clearly don't understand." "That's enough," I said, cutting her off. "You're not going to guilt me into doing this. I've done enough for this family, and this is where I draw the line." My father, looking desperate, tried one last tactic. "Think about Hannah, Emma. She's always been there for you." "No, she hasn't," I said, my voice breaking. "And neither have you." There was a heavy silence. For the first time, they seemed taken aback, as if they hadn't expected me to stand up for myself. But I had reached my breaking point. "This isn't about love or family," I continued, my voice stronger now. "It's about control. And I'm done being controlled." My mother's face hardened. "You're making a big mistake." "Maybe," I replied, feeling a strange sense of peace. "But at least it's my mistake." As they left, I knew this wasn't the end of the battle. But for the first time, I felt like I had a real shot at winning because I finally understood that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. The days following the confrontation were both freeing and brutal. I had finally drawn a line with my family, but the fallout wasn't easy. I had expected anger and resentment, but the sudden silence hit differently. The texts from Hannah stopped abruptly, and my parents' calls went unanswered. I had blocked their numbers after the meeting, but I still found myself bracing whenever my phone buzzed. It was like I was waiting for an attack that never came. I tried to focus on the present, on Jack, on work, on anything that could ground me. Luke, as always, was there with a steady hand and a reassuring presence. One evening, while washing dishes together after dinner, he noticed my faraway look. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" he asked quietly. I sighed, placing the plate I was drying on the counter. "I know I made the right decision, but it's hard to stop feeling like the bad guy," I admitted. He turned to face me, taking my wet hands in his. "Emma, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You did everything you could for them, and they still demanded more. This time you chose you, and that's okay." I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness. It was a truth I needed to hear, but the loss of family, however toxic they were, left a void. I had always hoped that one day, things would change, that they would see me beyond my usefulness. Now I had to accept that they never would. A week after the confrontation, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Hannah, and for a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. But curiosity won. I tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter, my heart pounding. It was short, only a few lines. "I never thought you'd actually say no. I really thought you'd come through for me. But I guess I was wrong about you. You've changed, and not for the better." I read it twice, feeling a strange mix of hurt and relief. Part of me wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell her everything I'd held back over the years. But the other part, the part that had finally learned to protect itself, simply folded the letter and tossed it into the trash. It was over. But the real closure came later that night. I was putting Jack to bed, reading him his favorite book about a curious little elephant who learns to be brave. He snuggled closer, his small hand resting on my arm. "Mama," he said sleepily, "are you happy?" The question caught me off guard, and I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I thought about it for a moment, about the pain, the rejection, and the emptiness of my family's absence. But then I looked at Jack, his messy hair, his big, innocent eyes, and the love that was so clear in his face. "Yes, Jack," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "I'm happy." And for the first time in a long while, I realized that I meant it. After putting Jack to bed, I joined Luke in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I sat next to him, resting my head on his shoulder. I think I finally feel free, I murmured. He smiled, wrapping an arm around me. You've always had the strength, Emma. It just took a while for you to see it. We sat there in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after a long battle fought and won. There would be scars, I knew that. And there would be days when I'd wonder what might have been if my family had loved me differently. But there was also a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that I had done what was right for me, for Luke, and for Jack. The following days were filled with a surprising calm. I poured my energy into the things that mattered most, taking Jack to the park, working on projects I'd put off, and even planning a small weekend trip with Luke. It wasn't an attempt to escape the pain, but rather to redefine what happiness meant on my own terms. Occasionally, I found myself staring at old family photos tucked away in a drawer. I used to feel a deep longing, a desperate wish to mend the fractured relationships. But now, there was only a dull ache, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd gained. I could see Hannah's face, my mother's stern expression, my father's distant gaze, and I no longer felt the need to earn their approval. One evening, I received an unexpected call from my aunt, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. She had always been a background figure, not particularly warm but not as dismissive as my parents. I heard what happened, she said cautiously. I braced myself for another wave of judgment. And, she continued, her voice softening, I just wanted to say that I understand. You did what you had to do. Her words surprised me. I hadn't realized how much I needed even a small sliver of validation from someone in my family. Thank you, I replied, my voice thick with unexpected emotion. Take care of yourself, Emma, she added before hanging up. It was a small moment, but it mattered. It was the first time someone from my family acknowledged that I had a right to my own choices, to my own life. And it was enough. The chapter with my parents and Hannah was closed, but a new one was just beginning. One where I was finally in control of my story, no longer defined by the weight of their expectations. With my family finally out of the picture, I found myself navigating a strange mix of emptiness and relief. It was as if a constant background noise had suddenly stopped. At first, the silence felt unsettling. I had spent so much of my life adapting to their demands that I wasn't sure what to do with all the free space in my head and heart. But as the days passed, the quiet began to feel like freedom. I focused on the life I had built with Luke and Jack. It was far from perfect. Our mornings were often chaotic, with cereal spilled on the floor and last-minute scrambles to get Jack ready for school. But it was real. For the first time, I was living without the shadow of unfulfilled expectations looming over me. I was free from the pressure to fulfill a hollow duty, surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. My new sense of peace showed up in unexpected places. One afternoon, Jack and I were at the park, watching ducks waddle by the pond. He laughed at their clumsy movements, his joy infectious. I watched him, marveling at the simplicity of the moment. I realized how much time I had spent preoccupied with pleasing others, time that could have been spent being present, truly present, with my son. Luke noticed the change in me, too. One evening, as we were cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, he wrapped his arms around me from behind. You seem lighter, he whispered, pressing a kiss to my temple. I think I'm finally seeing the real you. I leaned into him, feeling a sense of warmth and safety that had taken years to fully accept. Maybe I'm finally seeing her, too, I replied with a soft laugh. One of the biggest shifts came in the form of small decisions. I found myself picking up hobbies I'd long abandoned, painting, gardening, even yoga. Each of these activities, however small, was a declaration of autonomy, a way of reclaiming the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of constant obligation. I was no longer trying to be someone else's version of enough. I was simply being me. I also started therapy, something I'd been putting off for years. At first, it was painful to dig into the past, to unearth all the buried hurt and disappointment. But as I worked through it, I realized how much of my identity had been shaped by my family's neglect. My therapist, a kind woman named Ellen, helped me see that it was okay to grieve the family I never really had. Grief isn't just for what you've lost, she explained during one session. It's also for what you never received. The idea struck a deep chord in me. I had been grieving for years without even realizing it, grieving the mother who never nurtured, the father who never protected, the sister who never understood. But acknowledging that grief, rather than suppressing it, made room for something new, acceptance. I began to understand that my worth wasn't defined by their inability to love me. It was defined by the love I chose to give and receive now. Luke and I talked more openly about our dreams, our fears, and our future. We decided to move forward with a plan we'd always been hesitant about, buying a small house on the outskirts of town, where Jack could have a backyard to play in, and I could finally have a garden of my own. It wasn't just a new home. It was a tangible symbol of the new life we were choosing to build, a life free from the past's suffocating grip. The move itself was chaotic. Boxes everywhere, misplaced furniture, and a frustrated Jack asking why his toys weren't unpacked yet. But amid the mess, there was a sense of excitement, of starting over. I found myself standing in the empty living room one afternoon, feeling an unexpected rush of hope. This wasn't just a house, it was a fresh start. One weekend, as we settled into the new place, I invited some friends over for a small housewarming barbecue. It was a simple gathering, just a few close friends, some grilled food, and laughter that felt genuine. I watched Jack running around with the other kids, and I realized that this was what family really meant: love without strings attached, support without conditions, and joy in the present moment. As the sun began to set and the guests slowly filtered out, I stood in the backyard, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Luke came up beside me, handing me a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he said, clinking his glass gently against mine. "To choosing our own path," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the wine. It was a warmth born of finally embracing the life I had built, a life defined not by the absence of others, but by the presence of those who truly mattered. There would still be hard days, I knew that. There would be moments when memories of my family's rejection would resurface, triggering old wounds. But now, I had something stronger than regret: resilience. I had learned to choose myself, to put my needs and happiness first without guilt. And that, more than anything, was the path I had longed for all along. The life I had chosen wasn't the one I had been born into, but it was the one I had claimed. And in that choice, I had found a love that was more than enough.